When you talk about defense modernization, it's cause for anguish, deep anguish, because for decades, India's defense modernization has not been addressed in the appropriate manner by successive governments. And I'm only talking about the post Cold War from Prime Minister Narasimha Rao to where we are now. It has happened in an episodic manner. But the kind of sustained attention to defense modernization has not received the attention by the highest levels of India's political, bureaucratic, and professional leadership. And I have often said that the politician and the bureaucrat have abdicated when it comes to this part of national security. So, as a result, we are talking of a backlog that is mammoth. For the last 20, 30 years, India has not been able to provide the kind of attention and resources that defense modernization need. And a stark example, and I think this would perhaps illustrate the point for the reason for my anguish, India has been talking about a replacement to the Bofors gun since 1991, 92 maybe, Narasimha Rao's time. This came up in the Kargil War of 1999, Vajpayee was Prime Minister. In 2018-2019, we are still talking about getting the most appropriate replacement, and the short-term kind of, shall we say, solution was to get something from the United States on a government-to-government, while various so-called indigenous alternatives are still in the pipeline. Now look at this, 25 to 30 years to be able to get an artillery gun for a country like India, which has the security challenges that we are all too familiar with, 1962, 1965, 1971, Kargil, and as recently as the Pulwama kind of internal security challenge that we have. And yet we say that we are still taking a decision about the artillery gun. Forget the artillery gun. Look at the standard rifle that we issue to our infantry, the equivalent of the Kalashnikov. Again, a matter of shame and sadness. We do not have the capability to produce the equivalent of a modern, acceptable personal weapon, the Kalashnikov equivalent. Yes, we make nuclear weapons. Yes, we are able to send a probe into the moon, but we do not design and make our own Kalashnikov equivalent. So what do? We equip our infantry with, I'm sorry to say this, substandard personal weapons and personal clothing. And this is the state of India's, I would say, military inventory. Across the board, if you look at the Air Force, you look at the Navy, again, glaring gaps. The Indian Navy does not have minesweepers. Now, minesweepers are essential for a geography like India before the fleet leaves to ensure that you can clean up the harbor and the entry. For 25, 30 years, successive naval chiefs have been making this point to little avail. We still do not have minesweepers. We neither design them in India. It's not rocket science. Nor are we able to import them because of all the scams that we are familiar with. So the Indian military is constantly trying to do more with less. Now the story of the Air Force is equally, I would say, tragic at one level, that we lose pilots, young pilots at the training stage because we did not invest in the trainer. Now this is completely deplorable, unacceptable, but in India we get away with it because life is cheap. So this is what I mean by saying that if you look at the military inventory of India and the modernization, it is a huge growing gap, not been addressed. Now Prime Minister Modi has again promised to give this the highest priority. We have engaged or entered into various deals, United States, Israel, most recently with Russia. We are now talking about getting the Kalashnikov equivalent made in Amethi. It would be more, I think, a case of really, CKD kind of a thing. We are not going to be designing it, but we would assemble it or maybe manufacture it in Amethi, but it won't be an Indian product. But these are stopgap. We need a holistic review of India's military modernization needs and ensure that it receives adequate funding, which I'm afraid is not the case now.
All armed forces require periodic modernization because technologies are advancing very rapidly. Doctrines have to be progressed with the technology. Human resources development is taking place constantly, and you find that the threat paradigm is also changing. So modernization is actually a constant process, a roll-on process, I would say, which has to continuously carry on. As far as the Indian armed forces are concerned, there is rapid modernization going on in the neighborhood. China is, as we well know, is rapidly modernizing the PLA. They are going in for the jointness. They are going in for the induction of indigenous high capability equipment, particularly in the field of in the naval field, in the maritime field, as also in the Air Force. For example, they are going in for the 5th generation fighter aircraft. Under this scenario, the threat paradigm is going to change. Moreover, China and Pakistan are having a collusive approach, thereby increasing the threat levels that we are going to be posed. The next aspect is the present levels of our equipment in particular is dated. We do not have the most modern equipment. The ideal ratio is 30, 40, 30. 30 is to be modern equipment, 40 is the current state-of-art equipment, and the 30 can be, of course, the equipment which is on the way out. Our present ratios, I must say, are quite skewed towards the other side, that we have a large equipment percentage which is obsolescence in nature. So this also has as a factor which should be at the back of mind when we are doing modernization. And also we must also understand that a modern armed forces is going to provide the security that is required to the country, which will lead to our development, our economic development and our progression. So it is the importance is multifold.